In the final months of World War II, a group of Japanese prisoners of war vanished into the jungle and were never seen again. No guards were harmed, no perimeter alarms triggered, just 6 empty bunks, 6 missing men, and a camp that woke to silence. It was August 1945. The world was on the brink of peace, though no one at Camp 14 believed it. Hidden deep in the Pacific jungle, the Allied outpost was as forgotten as the men inside it, soldiers too dangerous to return to the battlefield, too broken to be left unattended. Some had surrendered. Others had been dragged from caves with grenades still clutched in their fists. All of them carried the war inside them. The official report was brief. 6 Japanese POWs unaccounted for during morning roll call. No signs of struggle, no damage to the perimeter. A few broken branches near the southern fence. Foliage trampled near the riverbed. Presumed dead, the file read, likely lost in jungle terrain. But over time, the details faded. The war ended, peace treaties were signed, and the missing men became just another unsolved wartime mystery, an unresolved footnote buried in the back of an archive box. Until 72 years later, when a team of modern-day explorers ventured into the jungle and found something no one expected to see. It wasn't a crashed plane, or a cave filled with bones. It was a village, handmade, overgrown, but unmistakably human. Bamboo structures on stilts, a makeshift shrine, rusted cookware, and deep inside one of the huts, a journal written in faded kanji. The story that unfolded would challenge decades of military history, reopen old wounds, and raise one terrifying question: what happened to those 6 men after they stepped into the jungle? This wasn't a fable, not an urban legend passed down around campfires. This was real, and what was left behind tells a story no one was supposed to know. Camp 14 wasn't on most maps. Even during the war, it was meant to be temporary, built in haste and isolation on a small, uninhabited island in the Solomons. The jungle swallowed everything quickly here. Roads, buildings, memories. By the time peace was declared, even the birds seemed to avoid the place. It was never intended to house prisoners. Originally constructed as a field supply station, Camp 14 became a holding site for high-risk POWs after nearby facilities overflowed. The camp had no walls, only barbed wire, watchtowers, and thick rainforest as natural defense. The guards were young, often undertrained, and just as scared as the men they watched. The prisoners were all Japanese soldiers captured late in the war, some fanatical, others broken, and a few simply too tired to keep fighting. Language barriers were absolute. Interrogations went nowhere. Most kept to themselves, sitting in silence for hours. No one expected them to smile, but no one expected them to vanish either. Conditions were brutal. Mosquitoes thick as smoke, food rationed and barely edible. Rain flooded the barracks so often that hammocks replaced beds. Guards rotated out every 2 weeks, burned out, sick, or mentally frayed. Morale was paper thin. Nobody wanted to be there. Not the prisoners, not the jailers, not even the jungle. Rumors crept in. Locals from nearby islands refused to approach the camp, saying the ground itself was cursed. Stories spread about figures seen in the trees at night, glowing eyes, drumming far off the trail. Some dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations. Others weren't so sure. Then came August 17th. It rained hard that night. The kind of storm that drowns out every sound except your own breathing. By morning, the camp's southern fence had collapsed under a fallen tree. 6 prisoners were missing. No blood, no tracks, just empty hammocks swinging gently in the breeze. A search was launched. Patrols combed the jungle. Planes scanned the canopy. But within days, the search was called off. "They're gone," one officer said. "Either dead or something else." The files were sealed. The war moved on, and Camp 14 was slowly abandoned, reclaimed by vines, mud, and silence, until someone returned. It started like any other morning. Fog hung low over the jungle, thick and unmoving, muting every sound. The guards at Camp 14 dragged themselves into routine, counting heads before breakfast, barely awake, boots sinking in wet clay. But something was off. A long pause. A second count. Then a third. 6 prisoners were gone. Their hammocks still swayed gently in the damp breeze. Personal belongings untouched. A rice bowl half full on the floor. No signs of a struggle. No broken locks. Just absence, like they'd evaporated into the night. At first, panic whispered through the ranks. The camp's southern fence had partially collapsed beneath a fallen tree during the storm, but the break was minor, easily missed, easily crossed. A single guard claimed he saw flickering movement near the perimeter hours before dawn shadows in the mist, but no alarms had been triggered and no dogs had barked. By mid-morning, search parties were deployed. They followed a faint trail of stripped leaves, small cuts in the undergrowth, as if someone had passed through in silence, careful not to leave a mark. But after a quarter mile, even that vanished. The jungle closed behind them, alive and indifferent. For 3 days, patrols pushed deeper into the forest. Men got lost. Compass needles spun in circles. Radios died without explanation. One soldier returned without his boots, eyes wide, mumbling in broken sentences about ghosts in the trees. They took him off rotation. The official report was clinical. 6 Japanese prisoners unaccounted for during morning inspection. Southern perimeter breach confirmed. Limited sign of travel. Presumed dead due to environmental exposure. The file was stamped, filed, and quietly forgotten. But not everyone believed they were dead. Not really. Something about the silence, about the precision, didn't sit right with the men who were there. They were soldiers, one guard later said. Broken or not, they knew how to disappear. Camp 14 was shut down months later. The jungle took it back, piece by piece. But somewhere past the ferns and vines, something remained unseen, undisturbed, and waiting. Years passed, then decades. The war ended. Nations rebuilt. Camp 14 vanished beneath moss and memory. But in the villages that dotted the coastline, stories lingered quiet, persistent, and never quite forgotten. Hunters spoke in hushed tones of shadows that moved between the trees without sound. Men shaped like soldiers but barefoot, sun-darkened, eyes sharp and silent. They'd appear for just a moment, then vanish again, swallowed by the forest. Traps were found dismantled. Fishing nets sliced clean. Tools stolen and replaced with unfamiliar carvings. Children said they heard drums at night. Soft, rhythmic, echoing from nowhere. Parents dismissed them at first, blaming the wind, the frogs, or old tales told too late before bed. But the stories kept coming. Different children, different villages, same pattern. One elder swore he once found a path deep in the bush stones arranged carefully, deliberately, like an invitation or a warning. At its end, he claimed, stood a wooden gate with kanji etched across the top. When he returned the next day with others, it was gone. Missionaries, loggers, and survey teams reported the same strange encounters. Figures watching from the ridgelines, camps ransacked without footprints, faint chanting on windless nights. But nothing ever concrete. Nothing you could hold in your hand and say, this is proof. And so the rumors faded into folklore. They are the jungle's ghosts, the locals said. The ones who walked into the forest and never came back. Some believed they were spirits. Others whispered that the soldiers had found something out there, some sacred ground or forbidden place, and had been changed by it, or claimed by it. Whatever the truth was, no one dared to find out, until 72 years later, when an expedition cut deeper into the rainforest than anyone in living memory. They weren't looking for the missing soldiers. They weren't chasing legends. They were following something else entirely. What they found wasn't a ruin. It wasn't a wreck. It was a village still standing, still intact, untouched by time, and it raised a question far more terrifying than anyone had prepared for. What if the stories weren't stories at all? For more than 70 years, the disappearance at Camp 14 was buried beneath paperwork and dust. A brief mention in military archives, a handful of witness statements, and a stamped conclusion, presumed dead. But in 2017, one man stumbled onto the case by accident. His name was Dr. Alan Whitmore, a retired historian from Melbourne who had spent his career studying forgotten theaters of the Pacific War. He wasn't chasing mysteries, he was chasing records. Inside a warehouse in Darwin, The Australian Defence Force had begun digitizing old wartime files. Whitmore volunteered to help catalog them. One afternoon, while sorting through a box labeled POW 1945 Miscellaneous, he found a folder that didn't belong. Its cover was water-stained, the ink almost gone. Inside were just 6 pages, a roll call list, a map fragment, and an after-action report from Camp 14 dated the 18th of August 1945. The report itself was routine clinical, detached. 6 prisoners missing. Search conducted, no sign, presumed dead. But then Whitmore noticed something scrawled in pencil along the margin, barely legible beneath faded type. Tracks led west. Too dangerous to follow. Abandoned search. He froze. West led nowhere, only dense, unexplored rainforest and mountains impassable, even by modern standards. Why would anyone bother writing that note? And who had decided it was too dangerous to follow? Whitmore copied the report and began digging. He found references to Camp 14 scattered across Australian and U.S. records, but most had been redacted. Mentions of unconfirmed sightings in 1947. Unverified signals. Picked up on a Royal Navy patrol in 1950. Then nothing. The trail stopped cold. To Whitmore, it was more than a mystery. It was a missing chapter of history, erased by time and bureaucracy. He published a short article online, The Lost POWs of Camp 14. It got little attention until a filmmaker named Eli Mercer reached out 6 months later. Mercer had spent years documenting forgotten war relics in the Pacific, sunken aircraft, abandoned bunkers, even lost ships. He told Whitmore he wanted to find Camp 14, not as a historian, but as a storyteller. People don't forget the past, Mercer said. Sometimes the past is just waiting to be found. They called it the Green Hell for a reason. The jungle was alive in ways that felt almost hostile, breathing, watching, waiting. In early 2018, Eli Mercer assembled a small expedition to follow the trail Whitmore had uncovered. His plan: trace the supposed escape route west of the old Camp 14 coordinates and document whatever remained. The team was small but deliberate. Dr. Alan Whitmore came as the historical anchor, the man who'd found the file. Lina Sato, a Japanese linguist and cultural researcher, joined to interpret any artifacts or inscriptions they might uncover. Marcus Vale, a former Special Forces survivalist, served as lead navigator, trained to move through the kind of terrain that swallows men whole. 2 local guides, Tama and Rico, brothers who'd grown up along the coast, completed the group. They began their journey where Camp 14 once stood. What they found was little more than rusted barbed wire, warped corrugated metal, and mounds of earth where barracks used to be. Nature had reclaimed everything. The air smelled of rot and rain. From there they pushed west, following faint topographical clues drawn from the old report. For the first few days the expedition felt almost routine: mud, mosquitoes, and endless green. But by the 4th day, something changed. They found signs of deliberate structure, tree trunks shaved flat, bamboo lashed together into ladders, a trail that shouldn't have existed. "This isn't random," Vale muttered, crouching over a carved post. "Someone lived out here, long term." Each night, the jungle grew louder. Insects shrieked in waves. The canopy above seemed to press closer, and always, just beyond their campfire's glow, came the sound of dripping water and something else. On the 6th morning, Thomas stopped dead in his tracks. He pointed toward a ridge, eyes wide. There, half swallowed by vines, stood what looked like the remnants of a fence. Not allied, not native, something older. Whitmore's hands trembled as he unfolded the map fragment from the 1945 report. The coordinates matched almost exactly. "They made it this far," he whispered. What they didn't yet know, what none of them could have imagined, was that the jungle wasn't hiding ruins. It was guarding a secret that had been waiting for them all along. By day 6, the expedition had already passed the point where most maps turned blank. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the jungle itself was warning them not to go any farther. Every step felt slower, every sound lingered longer than it should have. But then, just before noon, Vale raised a fist, his silent signal to stop. He'd seen something. Nestled in the roots of a banyan tree was a crude trap, a snare, constructed from bamboo, twine, and sharpened stakes. Still intact, still dangerous. It wasn't just old, it was well made. Too precise to be accidental. Vale crouched to inspect it, brushing aside leaves and debris. "This was designed for something big," he muttered. "Boar, maybe. This wasn't some hunter passing through. Whoever made this was living here." 10 feet away, half buried in mud, Mercer spotted something else. Metal. He pulled it free with gloved hands. A Japanese mess kit, rusted, dented, but unmistakable. Scratched into the underside were kanji characters, still legible despite decades of corrosion. Lena translated softly. "Private First Class. Shiro Tanaka. Imperial Army." Whitmore stepped closer, stunned. "That name was on the roll call," he said, "one of the 6 who disappeared." For a long moment, no one said a word. They had proof now, tangible, irrefutable proof that at least one of the missing men had survived the escape and made it into the depths of the jungle. It wasn't just a theory anymore. The story was real. They had crossed into it. That night, their campfire burned low and quiet. The jungle felt different now, not just alive, but aware. Vale placed motion sensors around the perimeter. Lena stared into the trees like she was trying to see past time, and Whitmore sat cross-legged with the mess kit in his lap, running his fingers over Tanaka's name like it was a relic from a ghost. Somewhere ahead, the truth waited. But none of them were ready for what they would find next. They found it on the morning of day 7. The jungle wall gave way without warning, thick vines parted like a curtain, and there it was, a clearing, silent, still. Framed by towering trees and dappled sunlight, a series of huts stood on stilts, leaning slightly but still intact. Time had worn the wood to a silver gray, but the structures hadn't collapsed. They weren't ruins. They were preserved. A village. The team approached slowly, reverently, as if stepping into a dream. Mercer filmed in silence. Vale scanned the perimeter, one hand on his knife. Lena was the first to enter one of the huts. Inside, she found futon mats made of woven grass, a clay stove built from river stone, a pair of wooden sandals placed neatly by the door. In another hut, Whitmore uncovered a shrine, small, simple, but unmistakably Japanese. A faded photo of a woman in a kimono had been tucked into the frame. An incense burner sat beside it, black with ash long cooled. A note, sealed in oilskin and written in trembling kanji, was placed at its base. Lena read aloud, "If we are not found, let it be known we lived, we endured, we remembered home." No one spoke for a long time. There were 6 huts in total, arranged in a half-circle facing the east. The construction was careful, purposeful, not survival shelters, but homes. Inside one, Mercer found a wooden comb. In another, a rusted blade carved from airplane scrap. There were bowls, tools, even a journal, its pages weathered but still legible. They hadn't just escaped. They had adapted, built, belonged. But the most chilling detail was what they didn't find. No signs of a struggle, no wreckage, no graves. The village had been abandoned, yes, but not destroyed. It was as if its inhabitants had simply stepped outside one day and never returned. "It's like they just vanished again," Vale said quietly. Whitmore looked around at the huts, his voice barely above a whisper. No, this was their sanctuary, and something told them it was time to leave. What that something was, they were about to find out. For the next 2 days, the team barely moved from the site. Cameras captured everything. Lena and Whitmore cataloged artifacts, carefully unfolding what history had tried to forget. What emerged wasn't a story of fugitives, but of survival, and something even deeper. The journal, though weather-worn, held entries dated from late 1945 through 1951. Written in flowing kanji, they described hunting routes, crop rotations, building schedules, and spiritual rituals. There were instructions on how to clean weapons, how to distill water, how to build rain catchers from split bamboo. These weren't desperate men clinging to life. They were organized, disciplined, intentional. Nearby, The team found tools fashioned from scavenged wreckage, aluminum turned into blades, wires twisted into snares. Mercer uncovered what looked like an old aircraft panel buried behind a hut. Stamped on it were faded Japanese characters and the remnants of a rising Sunday. It wasn't debris left by chance. It had been repurposed, hidden, respected. They had built terraces into the hillside for farming. Banana and taro leaves still grew wild in their wake. Simple irrigation ditches ran between them, carved and lined with stones. A clay oven sat beside one hut, blackened with soot, perfectly preserved beneath a thick layer of moss. But it was the shrine that lingered. Lena cleaned it gently with a soft cloth. Inside were incense sticks, smooth stones, and tiny folded paper cranes. Beside the shrine, someone had drawn a rising sun in red ochre, faded, but still visible. They weren't waiting to be rescued, Whitmore said quietly. They built a life here, after the war, after everything. It was a revelation few had expected. The men of Camp 14 hadn't disappeared. They had transformed from prisoners to pioneers, not just survivors, but builders of something sacred and hidden. Yet one question remained. If there were 6 escapees, why were there only 5 huts? The 6th structure stood apart from the others farther back, half swallowed by foliage, nearly collapsed. Unlike the others, it showed signs of disrepair. The door hung off one hinge. The roof had caved in. Inside, the air felt colder somehow. Still, undisturbed, they stepped in one at a time. The floor was covered in decayed leaves. Mold crept along the walls like veins. But among the rot, they found something that didn't belong. A torn uniform, its insignia barely visible, and beneath it, a crumpled, half-burned letter. Lena unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she tried to read what was left. The paper was fragile, brittle, blackened on one edge like it had been thrown into a fire, and then pulled back out. Only a few lines remained. I cannot stay. I have seen what they are becoming. This is no longer survival. It is something else. The letter trailed off into a scorched blur. In the corner of the hut lay a rusted rifle with its barrel bent, deliberately. Beside it, a makeshift rosary, handmade from beads carved out of bone. A spiritual tether in a place where faith had started to bend. Whitmore paced the room, unsettled. This isn't just neglect, he said. Someone was cast out, or left. There were only 5 names mentioned in the remaining journal entries: Tanaka, Sato, Ichiro, Nakamura, and Kenji. The 6th name, whoever it had been, was absent, erased. Whether by intention or force, the 6th man had become something else, a shadow, a warning, a memory no one dared preserve. Vale ran a hand along the hut's broken frame. If this guy left, where did he go? And why burn the letter? No one answered. Outside, the jungle swayed in the wind, the trees creaking like old bones. The 6th hut stood not just as a shelter but as a fracture, proof that something had shifted among the group. Something that no shrine or journal had dared to explain. And the deeper the team looked, the more it seemed clear. This village had once been paradise. But paradise had a cost. It wasn't until they scouted the perimeter that the true shape of the village came into focus. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a defensive position. High ground watch posts overlooked narrow trails. Bamboo fences had been constructed at strategic choke points, reinforced with sharpened stakes. Hidden caches of stones and carved spears were tucked beneath leaves, silent weapons, always ready. Vale found the first real weapon buried beneath a hollow log. A spear, its tip carved not from metal, but bone. Human, based on its shape. When he held it up, no one spoke. This wasn't just protection from animals, he said. The team followed narrow trails branching from the village, marked by faded carvings on trees. Along one route, they found what looked like a crude pit trap covered in ferns, lined with stakes. Half collapsed, but once effective. Then came the watchtower. It was built into a fig tree, almost invisible from the ground. Inside, rotted rope and a handmade whistle still hung from a nail. A lookout post. Long abandoned, but not forgotten. What were they afraid of? Mercer asked. No one answered. Back in the journal, Lena translated a passage dated mid-1948. The drums return at night. We post watchers until morning. We do not sleep well. Kenji says we must speak with the spirits soon. Whitmore frowned. Spirits? Lena hesitated. It could mean tribal tensions, or something more ritualistic. The clues painted a picture darker than simple isolation. The men had built a world, and something had threatened it. Maybe it was local tribes, maybe wild animals, maybe each other. Another passage, weeks later, was more direct. Ichiro fears Nakamura. He does not speak, watches us, carves in the trees when he thinks we sleep. Signs of strain, of fracture. The sixth man, the one who vanished, had been alone. Maybe by choice, maybe not. Whatever peace they had built was eventually cracked open. The jungle took its toll not just on their bodies, but their minds. And behind the quiet stillness of the village, there was now a darker hum, a sense that something had gone wrong here. Quietly, slowly, but irreversibly. They found it buried beneath the shrine, sealed in waxed cloth, tied with a strip of faded uniform. It was a letter unburned, unscorched, folded carefully and untouched by time. The handwriting was precise, almost formal, as if the writer had known it might be read long after he was gone. Lena sat beside the shrine, knees drawn to her chest, and translated each line aloud. The jungle seemed to hush as she spoke. Dearest mother, I write to you with hands that no longer remember the warmth of home. We are alive. We have survived. But I do not know if we can be called men anymore. We have forgotten the war, but not the fear. It lives with us now. Tanaka still sings when he cooks. Kenji prays at sunset. But the forest watches, and it never sleeps. I see things I cannot explain. I hear voices in the leaves, and still, I stay. Because I must. Because we are ghosts now, mother, but we live as men. The letter was signed Sato. No rank, no unit. Just a name, inked with finality. Whitmore knelt beside Lena. This wasn't confession, he said. It was testimony. Mercer set his camera down. The letter wasn't a clue, it was a goodbye. A message not to explain what had happened, but to affirm it. They had been soldiers, then prisoners, then fugitives, and finally, they had become something else. Outsiders might never understand. Maybe they weren't meant to. The village wasn't just the end of their escape, it was the beginning of a new life, one born from exile, grief, and the thin thread of memory stretched across oceans. They had not died in that jungle. They had chosen to live there. The evidence returned with the team in sealed crates, photographs, journals, rusted tools, the mess kit bearing Tanaka's name, and most importantly, the letter from Sato. Physical proof of a story long buried by time and vegetation. Proof that 6 Japanese POWs had not died in the jungle in 1945, but had lived there, built something, left something behind. The initial reaction from military archives was muted. The story was too strange, too complete, too unbelievable. But under pressure, both Japanese and Australian defense departments opened inquiries. Historians convened. Analysts reviewed the journal entries. Sato's letter was translated in full and archived. Even the damaged uniform from the 6th hut was matched to a missing soldier from Camp 14. Soon, families in Japan were contacted, names matched, photographs cross-referenced. One woman, now in her 80s, wept silently as she held a printed image of the shrine and whispered her brother's name. Shiro, you really lived? But not everyone saw it as redemption. Some experts dismissed the find as glorified desertion. They escaped a POW camp. They didn't report. They didn't return after the war ended. They vanished. Others called them spiritual survivors, war ghosts who refused to rejoin the world that broke them. Newspapers ran conflicting headlines. Japanese ghost soldiers found in Pacific jungle. Lost POWs or cowards in hiding. Mystery of Camp 14. A village time forgot. The debate raged. Were they heroes or fugitives? Visionaries or traitors? The truth, like the jungle, refused to be simple. Because the more the team revealed, the less the world seemed ready to understand. Even within the group, the question lingered. Vale believed they were soldiers to the end. They didn't surrender to anyone, not even the war. Lena called them pilgrims. They built a life based on memory and meaning. It wasn't an escape, It was a choice. Whitmore, who had first found the file, said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, maybe they became something we don't have a word for. And Mercer? He just kept filming. Because some truths can't be argued. They can only be seen. They returned to the village on the final night. The jungle was still, as if it knew. They brought no equipment this time, no cameras, no notebooks, no samples. Only silence and a shared sense that this wasn't a site to be studied anymore. It was a place that had given something, and now it was time to give something back. Vale cleared a spot near the shrine. He built a fire with dry branches and coconut husks, the smoke rising in thin gray spirals. The team sat in a circle, the orange glow dancing across their faces, casting shadows across the huts that stood like sleeping elders. Lena placed a folded note beside the shrine, wrapped in waxed cloth and tied with red string. Inside, she'd written in careful kanji, "You are not forgotten. You are not forgotten now." Next to it, Whitmore placed the mess kit cleaned, polished, the name still visible. Mercer added his own tribute, a single frame from his documentary, printed and laminated, showing the village as they had first found it. They spoke little. There was nothing left to say. The jungle around them remained quiet, but attentive. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch. It didn't feel threatening, only aware. When the fire burned low, Vale poured water over the coals. Steam hissed and rose. The team stood together in the clearing, the huts behind them, the shrine ahead. "Do you feel that?" Mercer asked, voice hushed. No one replied. But they all felt it. A presence. Not haunting, not hostile, just watching. They left the village slowly, one by one, never looking back. Not because they were afraid, but because some things are meant to be left whole. The jungle swallowed the path behind them. The fire died. The shrine remained. By morning, the village would be a memory again, half dream, half ghost, buried in green. But for one night, it had lived again. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of roads or reason, 6 names whispered through the trees, reminding the world they were here. The footage went viral within days. Clips from Mercer's documentary, shots of moss-covered huts, the shrine bathed in golden light, the rusted mess kit engraved with Tanaka's name spread across the internet like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Online forums buzzed. Academics debated. YouTubers speculated. And yet, even with photographs, journal entries, and a handwritten letter to a mother who never stopped waiting, the questions only deepened. What happened to the 6th man? Why did they never return after the war ended? Why abandon the village carefully, quietly, without a trace? And then came the most haunting question of all. Is someone still out there? A motion-activated camera, left behind by Mercer and retrieved months later, recorded a single image at dawn. Just a shape. Humanoid. Too tall to be a local, too narrow to be a boar or bear. It stood at the edge of the frame, between 2 trees, facing the empty huts. Then it was gone. Experts called it pareidolia, a trick of the light, lens distortion. But those who had been to the village didn't speak. Not because they didn't believe, but because they knew better. Some truths aren't meant to be dissected. Back in Tokyo, Sato's letter was read aloud at a memorial service, attended by descendants who had long believed their family stories were just myths. Whitmore sat in the back row, hands folded, head bowed. Mercer's film played behind the altar like living memory. The final scene showed the fire flickering beneath the shrine, the last note left behind. You were not forgotten, and yet, some things will always stay forgotten. The forest didn't give up its secrets. It lent them, briefly, to those willing to listen. The huts still stand. The shrine still waits. The fire pit is cold, but undisturbed. Somewhere, deeper still, a path may exist that no map has captured, a trail known only to 6 men who vanished and, for a time, built a world of their own. Maybe the 6th man walked farther than the others. Maybe he still walks. Or maybe the jungle claimed him, the way it claims everything eventually. Because that's the truth no archive can hold and no lens can capture. The forest remembers. It watches. And sometimes, if it chooses, it keeps what it finds. This story was intense, But this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.